Hello and welcome to another episode of Reach Your Ultimate Potential, where we talk about HR well-being and their self-confidence. I'm so happy to welcome Jordana Cole to today's episode. Welcome, Jordana.
Thanks, Ben. It's great to be here.
Thank you for being here. Now, we'd like to get started by hearing a little bit about your background, and then I'm really excited to dive into some of the knowledge that I've already heard from you and to hear even more nuggets. So if you would, tell us a bit about yourself.
Absolutely. So I'm a learning and development professional. I moved into this line of work about 7 years ago after having spent a really windy career path in everything from nonprofit work to higher education, academic advising, to the ed tech space in account management, and then managing an account management team. And I realized I just had a passion for developing people and in particularly making a broad impact. So I moved into L&D. I've had the opportunity to work in education technology, in higher ed, in financial services. And for the past 4 years, I have been working at Custom Ink, and we are an e-commerce organization where I am the director of learning and development here. And a lot of my focus is on really building out from end to end our leadership development strategy and programs, along with our professional development programs to help our team members, known as Inkers, thrive in their work and their life. And I also come with a master's in applied positive psychology. So I went back to grad school in my mid-30s to get a degree in the science of well-being. And I've had the opportunity to teach at both the graduate and undergraduate level at my alma mater, UPenn, to be involved with the Alumni Association and to really integrate a lot of this in the day-to-day of what I do. So I'm very excited to be able to share some of that knowledge, as you said, with others in this profession.
Very good. Thank you for that intro. Very impressive.
You got it. You got it. Well, I love to learn. What can I say?
That's appropriate for your L&D title then, huh?
It is.
So yes, you and I, we met at an event that you presented at for well-being for L&D professionals, right?
Yep.
So what I like to do, and I even did this on our one-on-one, but since you are an expert in that field, speaking from that side of the table, and now that it's been a number of weeks, I just want to ask again, what is one of the most pressing things that you'd like to share regarding well-being for HR and possibly L&D professionals specifically?
Yeah, that we need to focus on it. I think the biggest thing in the HR space, and not just true of L&D, whether you're a traditional HR generalist, whether you're in talent management, whether you're in total rewards, a lot of what's happened over the past couple of years, I think it's always been true, and the pandemic has accelerated it, is that we feel we're responsible for the well-being of other people. And that's a myth that I want to bust, because that's not actually true. But because we felt that way, I think it's led to a lot of burden that we've put on ourselves and a lot of focusing on caring for others, oftentimes at the cost of caring for our own well-being. So the reason I say that's a myth is because each of us is responsible for our own well-being. I can't be responsible for your well-being, Ben. You can't be responsible for mine. What that looks like to you is different what that looks like for me. But from the HR standpoint, what we are responsible for is creating the resources, creating the benefits, creating the relationships, creating the systems that help people thrive. Mm-hmm. And because of that, oftentimes as the creators, it means that we're also not really focusing that creation back on us. And we need to do it just as much as we need to provide it to our teams.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and I just want to insert this because I think it's a valid thing to discuss that happens to many of us. You and I, right before we hit record on this episode, we were talking about tabs and dings and notifications, right? Yep. And so I just want to talk about that reality and how it affects our well-being, because anybody in the HR role, whether they're in a super large company with many HR professionals or what is common, they're in HR of one. And so they have so many things open and so many things that they're dealing with, and then dings come in, and like you said, they feel responsible to take care of so many people and to solve so many problems, and that has a definite effect on the person. So speak to that, if you will.
Yep. And look, even as somebody who has a background in this stuff, I'm still guilty, because this is hard. We're talking about like really rewiring our brain and some of what's like true to just who we are as human beings. And what's fascinating about, a lot of email chats, the ways that we communicate right now is that they have been created to hijack our brain. So they're created in such a way that triggers these kind of dopamine receptors in our brain that we feel a sense of reward for responding to them. But we can kind of think of it like almost like if we're eating just a bunch of sugar or like M&Ms throughout the day. No, M&Ms is not sponsoring this podcast. And, just imagine if you're constantly popping in those M&Ms, like you might feel good in that moment for that jolt of sugar, that jolt of energy. And the more you eat, the sicker you feel. And then over time, that also is going to have impacts on your overall health because there's not a lot of nutrients in that. So I see like the constant response to the urgent emails, to the urgent chats is kind of like gorging on M&Ms all day long. And that has huge impacts to your well-being because you're focusing on being reactive versus focusing on things that are proactive. By the time you finish your day, you realize that your energy is fully spent or you're completely depleted. And then there's no time to kind of spend on yourself or the things that are important to you. Or we convince ourselves that if we don't respond to this person right away, something bad is going to happen or we're going to be letting them down. So we actually are motivated from feelings of guilt, which are also depleting, rather than from feelings that energize and sustain us.
Yes. No, see, I knew I wanted you on the podcast because you just speak so well about these things.
I like metaphors and I like
and it's good. See, now let's continue the metaphor of the M&Ms, right? Because it's interesting. One little M&M, you normally, well, we won't talk about the when we eat by the handfuls, right? But for the sake of the metaphor, we're talking one M&M at a time. And thinking of it that way, it's just like, oh, it's just one. It's fine, right? And then when we think, oh, it's just an email, or if it's just a ding, or if it's just a tab, we generally don't take the time to step back and say, oh my goodness, that's what I did pretty much all day long, is to respond to dings, right?
Yep. And it's like junk food for your brain, basically, is what's happening. And we're allowing it to take us over versus kind of taking control of our own day to day. And sometimes we convince ourselves, well, this is what I have to do. And it's not true. We actually wind up inadvertently setting the expectations that we're trying to break for other people. When we respond within 30 seconds of receiving that ding, what do you think is going to happen the next time that somebody reaches out to us? They're going to assume that we're going to respond in 30 seconds because we set those expectations. And then when we don't, they're going to go, where are you? So, a lot of this is about us resetting those expectations and resetting those boundaries up front so that we can be responsive and still do it in a way that's both healthy for us and healthy for others. Because if we don't, that's what leads to burnout or the sugar crash.
Yeah. So let's work through this from a coach's perspective for a second.
Yeah.
Let's say somebody is listening to this and they're feeling the guilt that exists. Oh yeah, I totally do that. And oh yeah, I spend most of my day this. And they're even listening to the podcast and they hear a ding like, ah, crap, should I check it or not? So they're relating, which is great because that's what I try to do specifically is to validate people's emotions first and foremost. Okay, because that's real. And now we need to say, all right, if you're there, here's a solution. But what's often missed in some resources is the reality of the in-between between the now and the solution. So let me just phrase that one more time, because yes, you and I could spend the next 15 minutes talking about solutions, and that's cool. But let's also just talk about the reality of some obstacles that come in the way of going from being guilty and being controlled by notifications to all of a sudden having healthy boundaries and doing what you're supposed to. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. There's actually some interesting research about that in the realm of positive psychology that you might find fascinating. It's by a researcher named Gabrielle Oettinger, and she has something called mental contrasting and implementation intentions. And it's all about goal setting, that we're much more likely to actually meet our goals when we identify what's the most realistic obstacle that's going to come into play. And when that happens, not if, when that happens, what are we going to do in order to overcome it? Because what happens is when we've got that plan in advance, when we're in that moment of the high stress, it takes all of our mental energy to also focus on, okay, how am I going to solve this? But if the past version of yourself has already solved that for you, then you can focus just on putting that into action. So I think that's even part of the process, is identifying what is the most likely obstacle and what can I do to either mitigate that in the moment or proactively avoid that. So, you shared something about like the validating others' emotions. And, it's interesting when we think about well-being, it's much more than just physical health or, mental health. That's wellness, feeling good. Well-being includes that and more. And it's this whole concept of actually living well, living in a fulfilled and meaningful way. And one of the elements of well-being is strong relationships. And it's really easy for us to overdo it on relationships. Like there's such a thing as too much of a good thing. Like there's too much of M&Ms. And going back to that. And I think we can get overly empathic, where we make assumptions about what another person's thinking or feeling, or how another person might respond if we do something. And instead of making these assumptions in our head of what's going to happen, I think we're actually going to boost our well-being and our relationships through that if we have more conversations. So have that conversation with that person on the other side and ask, hey, when do you need this by? Or, when you reach out to me, how quickly would you expect me to respond? Or let's talk about how you can identify, or how I can identify what's something that's urgent and what's something that's there for me when I can get to it, so I can make sure to support you in the right way. Doing something like that, breaking down those assumptions and actually engaging conversation, is such a win-win-win, because you're fostering better trust, stronger relationships, you're setting better boundaries and stronger expectations. And it allows you to do that proactively rather than operate from the guilt in the moment.
I love it. And what you were saying reminded me of a quote by Thomas S. Monson. He said, "When the moment of decision arrives, the time to decide has passed." So to me, that's exactly that principle that you're talking about. We can be proactive and look into the future a little bit, prophesy, whatever cool word you want to use, and say, wow, on Thursdays, I am generally inundated with these emails, or I have 10 meetings, which take up my entire day. And so I'm very reactionary that day. But knowing that, what can I do differently to feel more empowered and to not end the day and saying, oh my goodness, what did I do today? Right? So we can visualize ourselves and they say, at the end of Thursday, how do I want to feel? Or what do I want to have accomplished? And how can I plan to do that?
Yes. I'm actually going to go right back to Dr. Gabrielle Oettingen, because she has an incredible framework that I love called WOOP. Not to be confused with WOOP. There it is, by the tag team or boys. I forget the name of the band, but WOOP. And that stands for, the W is your wish. And that's kind of visualizing the future state that you want to accomplish. So thinking about, how do I want to feel, at the end of the week? What would that look like? What would that feel like? What would that smell like? All of your senses, picturing yourself at the end of the week where you have gotten these projects done, where would you be? The first O stands for outcomes. What would the results of that be? If you could get there, what would that mean for yourself? What would be the impact to the people that you support? What would be the business impact? And then going back to what we talked about earlier, the next O is for obstacle. What's the greatest obstacle that stands in your way to making that happen? And the P is for plan. When that obstacle comes into play, what will you do to overcome it?
I love that.
So you can use that for starting your day, for starting your week, and just thinking about, less in what do I want to get done, and more about like, how do I want to be? How do I want to feel? What is a end of a day success look like for me? Maybe it's leaving today feeling like I still have some energy left in the tank, or maybe it's leaving today feeling like I've strengthened my relationship with somebody, or I've been actively present in all of my meetings. And you can actually design the plan back from there.
I love this. And this idea of WOOP, I mean, it makes me think of something that I teach, of having a physical, doing something physical that links to an emotional reaction, right? And so it programs you to be positive, and then you can see life in a positive way, or in other words, feel empowered, right? And so I imagine this word WOOP, you don't generally hear somebody, well, whoop, whoop on that, right? Pretty discouraged about it, but it's generally a whoop, a pretty cool thing, right? And so that's an awesome thing for you to bring up, and thank you. It has great things that we can break apart, that we can understand in the mind, and it can connect to the heart through emotions to really start our day, or like you said, any part of the day, and say, okay, well, how can I whoop it right now, huh?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And positive emotions are such a core aspect of your personal well-being. And, that's also not to say that we should just, think positive all the time. Like we need some of those, constructive or negative emotions too. It's having the right balance and the right amount. To your point, WOOP it's an excitement thing. And that idea of the wish, it's not about, I wish today doesn't suck as much as yesterday, right? Like
Right,
it's
yeah.
about, what is that true ideal desired state that you're looking for? And I don't know how often we start our day thinking like that. Too often it's about, what do I need to get done? And think about the mindset that already puts us in, right? We're exhausted. We look at that to-do list. Some people it motivates. For others, it could be, super, super strenuous. And instead, if you visualize, what's it going to feel like? What do I want to feel like when I end this day? That's energizing. That's life-giving.
Yeah, I love it. And what comes to my mind is, this is something that can definitely be done. I'm talking to a listener right now, right? This can be definitely done alone by yourself. This WOOP principle, it's very awesome, very powerful. That's also where the benefit of having a mentor, a coach, or somebody to speak to can help you with new ideas, to help you see through the fog. Or if you are stuck in some, let's say, negative emotions, for lack of a better term, and just saying, I just don't know how I can. Yesterday sucked, all my days suck, and I just don't see a way out. And that's where somebody from a third perspective and a professional background can say, well, have you thought about this? Or let's work through this emotion so that it can release as it should, and then you can get back to whooping your day, right?
Absolutely. I love that you brought that up because, right, sometimes it takes just that outside party to ask us the right question, to pause us in our tracks, break our mental habits, and get us to, see something for another light. And sometimes I've even done exercises with people in my own workshops where we've used this, and we've kind of framed out the 4 questions, and I've just handed those 4 questions, partnered people up, and said, okay, you can only ask these questions and nothing else. And you're just to jot down what the other person says. So sometimes even just having that other person to bounce off can be really valuable. I'm a big fan of coaching, and I think everybody should have a coach. There's so much power in it. And if you don't, you can always just, give these questions to a peer, a partner, and say, I need a little bit of help. I need somebody to prompt me so I can get out of my own head.
Yeah. And to that point, I mean, it's just so powerful to have that point of view. One is the principle of just giving space to address it and talk about it and feel it and be there. And the other is to have a person who's not going to judge, who's professional enough to stick to these questions, for example, and to just be there for you. Because even successful business owners, even high-powered HR professionals, it doesn't matter who you are, but we all face these times where we've been laden on with so many things to do, right? So many, I'm forgetting the word, but tasks, or yeah, it's not coming to me, but so many things to do, so many things on our plate, right? We all relate in HR. And sometimes because of that, all of a sudden we get tunnel vision and we forget all the amazing things that we're capable of, or the amazing person that we are. And then we start to view life as, well, it's just one more day. I don't like my job. It affects my family relationship, and you just see where this goes. It tanks, and then you're not living life the way that you want. And so it does take that breath of fresh air to just reach out and say, you know what, I don't even know what I want to talk about. I don't know what help I need necessarily, but here's what I'm going through. And then the person can really help them out. Go ahead.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up because, yeah, the way our brain chemistry works is it's really easy to get in that spiral. And what happens is that, we have as human beings a negative bias. So it's easier for us to spot the things that are frustrating or not working. And when we start going down that path, because this comes from like our earliest evolution of survival instincts and problem solving, we go further and further and further down that path. And that makes us great in emergencies. And it makes us really struggle when we need to collaborate, when we need creativity, when we need innovation, when we're forward looking. And there's small things that you can do for yourself or with other people. Like one of the most common well-being practices is a gratitude journal. So at the end of every day, focusing on and sharing, these are 3 things that I'm grateful for today. And they can be the same 3 things that you write every day. It could be, I'm grateful to have, a warm bed to sleep in. It could be, I'm grateful specifically for this conversation I had. And that doesn't work for everybody either. Because that's one of the things about your own well-being is it's different person to person. For me, there's just something about the word gratitude that I don't know. I like appreciate better. That just works better for me. I have struggled with actually creating gratitude journals. What I found for me is that, one of the things that I really value and one of my strengths is humor. So I started instead jotting down 3 things that made me laugh every day because I love to learn and contribute to learning to others. I started jotting down 3 things that I learned today, or something I learned from somebody else and something I taught to somebody else. And just ending my day in that transition from work to home, really kind of resetting and reflecting. And it takes no more than 5 minutes on, really the things that matter. And it's amazing how simple something like that can have such an impact in removing that fog or that cloud from your eyes. And there's this concept called broaden and build. And that when you start actually activating some of those positive emotions, when you reframe, what can happen is that can actually expand your perspective, expand your viewpoint, build and increase the positive emotions. You'll start seeing some of the good things along the way, and your creativity, your connection, all of it flourishes because of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this is good. And I appreciate you bringing in all this science aspect because, this is stuff that I absolutely love. And it's helpful to hear it in different ways on how the brain works and how these things are true principles and how they work and how they've been studied and everything else. One thing that I wanted to bring up is when I first heard from you, you mentioned that, well-being or the things that help look different for everybody else, right? Or different people, I should say. So it's not that, hey, we just told the 3 things that work for everybody and they always work, and this is all you have to do. These are things that do work. The gratitude is awesome. The finding humor is amazing. And so an idea that just popped into my head, just barely as you were saying that, we do need to find things that we do and try new things until we find what works, right? Because somebody may be similar to you and think, wow, gratitude, really? I've heard that before. I just don't know. I'd rather call it something else or whatever. We all have our maybe mind barriers. And if so, that's okay. Just validate it, honor it, and say, okay, well, what's my other option? And so here's the idea that came to my mind. With all the things that we've heard, we've even talked about them right now in the podcast, the reaching out, the gratitude, the finding humor, and everything else. Maybe just say, here's a list of 3 things that when I need an emotional reset, I can choose one of them. I don't have to do all of them, but I can choose one. And that's something that it's preparing for the future and saying, wow, yeah, on Thursday when it's hard, I need to do something. I don't know what it is, and I'm not committed to any of them, but I am going to do at least one of these 3. And that's a good way of preparing for that success. What do you think about that?
I love that idea. I love that idea so much because it is, to your point, unique to each person. And I think it kind of puts some of these things into practice that we're talking about. I actually have a similar exercise that I've developed around jolts of energy. So if you need a 5-minute boost for your own energy or for your own well-being, what are some of the things that you can do, whether it's 3 or 4 things. And I have some questions to help people think, like, either what kind of gives you a sense of feeling refreshed. For some people, it's actual physical movement. So if all I have is 5 minutes, knowing if I get up and move, or if I go give my dog a hug, right? Like that's the sort of thing that helps me feel refreshed. What are the sorts of things that put my mind at ease? What are the sorts of things that might make me laugh? Who are the people that make me feel good when I connect with them? I literally have I have YouTube videos that when I'm having a bad day, I know if I just click on that, it's just going to be like a jolt of life. So having your, like, it's almost like your go bag for nourishment and positivity. Like, what are those things that fuel you? And so not thinking about, and this is something that when I was on the webinar, I think you heard me talk about, I think we wait to focus on our well-being when we get a break. It's like, well, I'll just do this big splashy vacation, or I'll just take these days off because I'm burnt out. And no, it's what are the consistent practices that I'm doing day by day in the moments that I have to really kind of fuel and nourish myself. And so it's those sorts of things, like the small things that, that those are my list of, no matter what's going on, these are surefire ways that will either make me feel good, will give me a boost of energy, will help me feel connected, will clear my mind. I mean, that's the best thing that you could do for yourself.
Absolutely. I love it. So I'm going to end with an example, and then we'll ask if you want to share one last thing. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. So me today, every morning recently, I've tried to do a short meditation. That's just something I'm trying to see if it works for me. And so I did this morning. Great. Started my day. Cool. And then right before this, I had lunch. And I'm telling you, I don't know what it is, but lately when I have lunch, it just knocks me out. Let me tell you, when you're just so snoozed and you're like, wow, where did all my energy go? And that's how I was feeling. And I'm like, oh no, but I have this podcast and this is important to me. And how am I going to be okay for it? And so I had to go through a couple mind barriers. One was the feeling of guilt, and one was a feeling of, well, I already did that. Because I'm like, well, what should I do for 10 minutes to prepare myself? Should I just work and get something else done because I'm supposed to be working? Or can I take a break? And what would that break look like? And so for me, I said, well, I'm going to find a 10-minute meditation. So I did. And during the meditation, let me tell you, I had some thoughts come up, and I had some thoughts from years ago at my old job, feelings of guilt. It's like, man, what if somebody walks by my office and sees me meditating in the middle of the day? So I had all sorts of guilt that I was working through, but I did the meditation and I felt great. It really reset me for this podcast. And so the final principle is sometimes a person like a coach can be needed for those elements of guilt that come up with these well-being tools. Let's say everything that we mentioned today, they work, they're great. But if we don't do them because of a sense of guilt, then please reach out to somebody so that can be removed for the benefit of your well-being. That's what I wanted to say.
I love that, Ben. I mean, as an L&D professional, I coach, I've coached over 100 different leaders in this past year, and I still engage with a coach myself because as my coach reminds me, you can't coach yourself and even coaches. And that frame of guilt, I think sometimes we convince ourselves that taking time for ourselves is actually taking time away from other people or taking time away from us doing our job. And if I can leave you with one thing, if you take nothing else from this podcast, I want you to know that's not true. Being there for other people in the work that we do is about being at our best. And when you are depleted, you are not able to be there for other people. Taking care of yourself, focusing on your well-being so that you can serve others is actually part of your job. And it kind of goes back, I always think to, the airplane. When you're on an airplane, they tell you to put on your oxygen mask first before you help others who need it. And I think that's what we all need to be doing better in HR. We are not going to be able to help those who need our help if we do not have that flow of oxygen for ourselves. And everything that we've talked about today is all about how we oxygenate our well-being.
Exactly. I love it. Thank you. And Jordana, if somebody wants to get a hold of you for whatever reason, how can they do so?
Yeah, great question. I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to connect with me. I regularly share thoughts on leadership. So I would love to, connect with more people, hear their thoughts on that. If you just find me, my name is Jordana, Jordana Cole, Cole, and you'll see there'll be a comma and map, MAPP, after that, because I'm very proud of this degree, as are many of my fellow mapsters, as we call ourselves.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for listening. Please choose one thing that you learned from today's podcast and apply it and see how it affects your well-being in a positive manner. And we'll talk to you next week.